What we're about to get into might shift the way you see a few relationships, past or present. You've been warned. We're going to be digging into the difference between love and attachment. And listen, this is not about calling you out or telling you that what you feel or felt isn't real. This is an invitation to get clear on what's actually happening beneath the label of love. Because when we start naming things for what they are, we give ourselves a chance to choose differently with more clarity, more self-trust, more groundedness. So here's where we're going in this episode. Let me just give you the map. We are going to start with a working definition of love, one that's real and useful and not full of fairy tale fluff. Then we're going to talk about what attachment actually feels like, not what it means. We're not going into attachment styles and that thing. There's plenty of information about that. But we're going to talk about what it feels like so you can know how to recognize it in your body and in your behavior. And then from there, we are going to get into why love and attachment get so tangled up. Then we're going to zoom out and look at how this plays out in long-term relationships, in dating scenarios, short-term love, etc. And finally, we'll close by talking about what becomes possible once you know the difference between love and attachment, because awareness is everything. So let's get into it. In All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is one of my faves, there is a definition that I keep coming back to when it comes to love. She says, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Let me say that again. Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. That's a vibe, right? Because that definition doesn't say anything about chemistry. It doesn't mention anything about intensity or adrenaline or longing. It basically says that love is a choice. It's an action. It's grounded in a desire to support growth. It doesn't say anything about supporting comfort or companionship or closeness. I want you to notice that the definition also doesn't say anything about the other person feeling it too. Because love can be real on your end, but that does not mean it's mutual, and it also doesn't mean that it has to be. A lot of people get stuck thinking that if I love them enough, they'll meet me here. Maybe you've heard yourself or someone you know say things like, I know they have it in them. She just needs more time. He's going to come around. But love isn't about holding out for someone to become who you imagine them to be. It's about choosing and wanting to grow, even if the other person isn't all in. Now, that seems like sacrificial lamb, right? So that's why we got to get into the attachment part. I want to talk about and explore attachment, not as a diagnosis, but just as a very human thing. So again, we're not going to be talking about attachment styles. So let's start with a working definition of attachment. So attachment in its simplest form is the emotional bond we form with someone else. It's the part of us that wants to feel connected, to be close. And that's essential. That's human nature. But what happens for a lot of us, especially those of us who grew up in households where love was inconsistent or conditional, or we felt like it had to be earned, is that our attachment patterns get shaped by survival. So even though we are grown as hell, even though we know better in theory, we still find ourselves pulled toward dynamics that feel familiar, which is not necessarily healthy, but just familiar. We attach to people who remind us on some deep unconscious level of relationships that we had to manage when we were younger. Keep in mind, it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It can look like staying in something that doesn't nourish you because it doesn't feel unsafe, which doesn't necessarily mean it feels good, right? But it doesn't feel bad. It can also look like connecting or bonding with someone, not because you are in love with them, but because their presence has a kind of emotional home base. In other words, it feels like something you know, even if it's lonely. So attachment isn't the problem. It's when we confuse what we call love when really it might just be a pattern of familiarity. Forgive me if you hear a dog barking in the background. My neighbor has a dog that loves to have conversations while I'm recording. But, anyways, so a lot of times when we think about attachment or unhealthy attachment, we think about obsession. We think about things like that show called You on Netflix. Like he's obsessed, right? But attachment doesn't always look like that. Unhealthy attachment does not always look like that. It's really, let me see how I can put this simply. It's like your nervous system sees something in the other person and says, "Oh, I know this." And sometimes knowing this comes with longing and hunger, and that's when it's unhealthy. So, why do we confuse love and attachment, and why does it even matter? Because everything around us tells us to. The shows we watch, the books we read, the music we listen to or grew up on, we were taught that love is supposed to be a roller coaster, that jealousy means you care or that they love you, that drama is depth, and that the more someone makes you wait, the more rewarding it'll be when they finally see the light that you're the one, right? And then we layer in biology, our thoughts about connection, desire, possibility. All of that creates an emotional cocktail, hormones, dopamine, estrogen, oxytocin, all of that stuff creates this hormonal cocktail that floods our system. So then we're literally on a chemical high. And then our thoughts become stories, which are not necessarily steeped in reality. So often we're responding to a fantasy. And so we're getting emotionally attached to someone who may not even be aligned with us simply because of what we learned through osmosis from what we watched, what we read, and then the hormonal cocktail, and then also how we interacted with our primary caregivers as children, right? So sometimes attachment starts before the relationship. So you meet someone and your mind starts building a future. You imagine how you're going to feel, you script their character arc, and you turn the other person into someone that's worth waiting for, even if they are not, even if they're ignoring you, even if you're not feeling nourished, even if you feel like you're chasing. And for the record, this doesn't just happen at the beginning of relationships. So it's not limited to new connections or casual dating. This also happens in long-term relationships. So you might be 5 or 10 years in. You've got a whole life together. You share bills and friends. You know each other's rhythm. But something just isn't right because you're still hungry, right? You got food on tap and you're still hungry. There's a loneliness that you can't explain, a silence that just doesn't feel peaceful, but you stay anyway. You stay not for who they are right now, but for the possibility of who they might become because you're still holding out for the turning point, the big shift, right? For the moment when they finally see what you've been trying to offer them all along. But here's what I need you to know. Life is not a rom-com. So there's not always a breakthrough, right? Sometimes people stay stuck. Sometimes dynamics don't evolve. Sometimes you're just in a holding pattern. And the longer you stay attached to the version of them that you're waiting for, the more of yourself you lose in the process. So what do you do with all this? Well, you don't stop dreaming, that's for sure. You don't stop imagining love or partnership or depth. But you do let your dreams be rooted in what's real. You let your imagination grow from truth and not from hope that someone will finally turn around or transform into the person you need them to be. If you're dating, that might mean noticing the difference between interest and availability. If you're in a relationship, it might mean asking yourself, can I imagine a future with this person? Not just the one that I want, but one that reflects who we actually are. Because awareness doesn't mean that you have to walk away. It just means that you finally face in the right direction. So you can still hope, you can still hold vision, but now it's grounded. Now it includes what's real and not just what's possible. And that's where love lives, right? Not in waiting, not in fantasy, but in the willingness to stay awake. So if this is hitting a nerve for you, if you're realizing that maybe what you called love was something else entirely, I just want you to know that it's okay. Me too. Me too. But clarity around whether you're loving someone because you are committed to their growth on all levels, and hopefully they're committed to your growth on all levels. That kind of clarity is real love. It doesn't require you to perform or chase. It allows you to breathe and be and become, because love is rooted in reality. In a reality that leaves space for evolution and possibility, but is also based on truth, not fiction. And know this, I love you. I am committed to your growth on every level. And that's what love is about.